The first shuttle to take off was the Columbia in April of 1981. But as the headlines subsided and the public began to take the shuttle for granted, problems appeared. It was clear almost from the start that the shuttle could never keep the ambitious number of flights per year NASA had promised. By 1985, launch facilities NASA intended to be busy every week were sitting idle. Managers became frantic to speed up the lagging number of launches. 60 missions had originally been predicted for 1985. The number to actually lift off was only 9.
A skeptic is one who knows the system and yet knows what doesn't fit in. And that's the kind of attitude, that's the kind of people that we want right in the middle of our complex, high-power systems. People who will raise informed, tough questions.
In spite of their growing frustrations over the delays, NASA was also growing ever more confident in the marvelous machine they had built. Perhaps too confident. To build such a machine was a stunning accomplishment, but in its very technological prowess lay its greatest potential for disaster.
What we know about complex technical systems, like the shuttle system, is that the more complex they are, the more they are likely to have flaws. And we know the same thing about complex organizations. The bigger, the more difficult it is to retain a kind of a culture that's resistant to error.
January 27th, 1986. After 3 days of delays, the Challenger waits to become the 25th shuttle mission. But now, on the eve of one of the most important launches in its history, the NASA organization had to deal with engineers who were insisting that the Challenger should not go up. The weather forecast for Florida called for cold. 1,800 miles away in Utah, that forecast worried engineers at Morton Thiokol, the builders of the solid fuel boosters. They were worried that the cold could cause O-ring seals in the boosters to fail.
On the night before the Challenger launch, this issue came to a head. Thiokol asked for a meeting over a telephone line with NASA, and the solid rocket manager told NASA that he could not sign the papers for launch.
NASA management was concerned about setting a precedent of 53 degrees as a limit for launch. They wanted no more obstacles to getting this big bird up in the air.
It became very heated. Thiokol engineers were challenged on almost every engineering point. Engineers were arguing that they shouldn't go. Manager was saying, well, where's your data? And they didn't have real data. They had intuition and hunch, which didn't work. It was not listened to.
The burden of proof, then, is on those who would want to stop the flight, because it's a bad thing for you. It's a bad thing for your mission, for your reputation, for NASA, to have to delay again. There was a lot of that going on.
Thiokol engineers were intimidated. One NASA manager shouted, "The next thing you know, I won't be able to launch until next April."
This meeting was very difficult. At one point, NASA asked a manager at Thiokol to take off his engineering hat and to put on his management hat, as if that would make the decision more clear, the risk more acceptable.
By the end of the meeting, pressure from NASA managers to keep the launch on schedule proved too much. After discussing it amongst themselves, Thiokol officials came to a decision.
They went back on the teleconference line and said, we've reconsidered and we've decided to recommend launch.
There was a degree of confidence in management that we knew what we were doing, and when they didn't hear the screaming and hollering from someone down below that we absolutely should not launch, management said to themselves, well, we believe that we have a safe system, and they proceeded on.
January 28th, 1986. A cold dawn revealed a NASA launch pad covered with ice. With hindsight, it seems impossible to believe that a decision to launch in these conditions could have been made. But it had been decided. bureaucratic goals would take precedence over caution and safety.
Followed by Krista McCall, a feature in space.
The Challenger would lift off as planned. Engineers closest to the data had been talked out of their objections. They had been required to prove their worst fears were true, rather than NASA proving they were not. But NASA had conditioned themselves to rationalize dangerous problems for the organizational goals of the program.
Very dangerous. NASA got on a slippery slope. One step at a time, they went from expecting there to be no damage to having some and then accepting more and more. So on the eve of Challenger launch, they made the decision to go, and it was just one more step in a procedure that had started quite a long time before that.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
If all disasters are preceded by hints, what was about to happen to Challenger had been preceded by voices pleading to postpone the mission.
Control program confirmed. Challenger now heading downrange.
Demanding proof instead of listening to caution, NASA had gambled that the frigid O-rings in the solid booster would hold.
Engines beginning throttling down now at 94%.
58 seconds after liftoff, NASA lost the bet. A small flame emerged from the right solid rocket booster in one of the joints supposedly protected by its O-ring. Deflected by the force of air rushing past, the flame was turned against the side of the main fuel tank. Seconds later, Challenger disappeared. As families of the astronauts looked on with first confusion, then horror, the solid boosters flew off in wild contrails. NASA managers could only watch in stunned silence as the crew compartment tumbled through the smoky clouds.
Flight Fido, go ahead. RSO reports vehicle exploded.
The compartment would take over 2 minutes to fall into the sea.
Copy.